Um, welcome. Oh, okay, so yeah, just to welcome all of you, all participants, all colleagues from UNICEF, UNFPA. I saw that we have government partners, NGO partners, youth activists joining us. So welcome very much to our webinar today on the importance of context-specific responses in response to context-specific drivers of child marriage. And maybe before I start, I would just like to very quickly say something about our presenters and about this this event. So Gillian Munn, who you have just seen on the screen, is a social anthropologist with a background in child development. She is head of research with Child Frontiers. It's a consulting company focused on child well-being and protection. And she's working with a team of colleagues, including Joachim, who will present very shortly, and others, to support country strategy development processes in West and Central Africa and in Eastern and Southern Africa. Joachim, who will be presenting very shortly, has worked for more than 30 years in international development across different regions in Africa, in the Middle East, Asia, amongst others. He worked as a regional child protection advisor in the UNICEF Regional Office of West and Central Africa, where I'm sitting today. And he also worked as a chief of child protection in the UNICEF India office. And over the past 6 years, he has been working on child marriage and other child protection issues with Gillian and colleagues more closely. So perhaps to put this webinar into a quick context, UNICEF in Eastern and Southern and in West and Central Africa have commissioned Child Frontiers to design a methodology for the development of child marriage strategies and to implement this in 13 countries across the regions. And this work involves analyzing country situations to identify the specific drivers, the context, the dynamics, opportunities, and then identify the highest impact areas for investments in evidence-based child marriage programs. And as well as supporting the country studies and the strategy development, this project also involves establishing a virtual learning platform. And this webinar is part of this learning platform. And I will say something more to it later, and we will also remind you later how to spread the word and get more colleagues and interested parties involved in this platform. So perhaps just for anyone who came late, to remind them how the interpretation function works. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, click interpretation, choose your language, and select the mute original audio. I would also like to remind everyone who's only joined now to please introduce yourself, just with your name, country, organization in the chat box. And please to mute yourselves and turn the videos off. And I think with that, we could go over to the webinar outline. So just to give you a quick outlook what's going to happen next. We have a presentation by Joachim, who I just introduced very quickly, and he will tell us a little bit more about drivers of child marriage and how they can vary by context. We will then have a presentation both by Burkina Faso colleagues and Sierra Leone colleagues, who will be introduced by Joachim following his presentation, and they will tell us a little bit more about how they're responding to the specific drivers and situation within their countries and their partners. And of course, you will have a chance to ask questions. We have lots of time for Q&A, so please do write your questions into the chat box during the presentation whenever they come up, or raise your hand and then we will invite you to speak later. And also just to let you know that the slides will be shared. We will send a link in the chat box to a shared Google Drive folder, and there you will also find the recording at a later stage. So I think that's all I'm saying for now. So I'm handing over to Joachim, and I hope you all enjoy the presentation and the discussion following afterwards. Over to you, Joachim.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Let me share my screen. And stop. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. My presentation highlights two different country contexts, as Catherine said, Sierra Leone and Burkina Faso. And the countries represent different contexts with different drivers of child marriage. The presentation identifies these priority drivers and focuses on how to address these drivers in the specific contexts where girls and boys and their families live. Some of the drivers of child marriage are common across many contexts, including poverty, lack of access and low quality of education, limited access to adolescent sexual and reproductive health services, limited economic opportunities for young women and adolescent girls, discriminatory gender norms, and often also gender-based violence. But there are also some differences, different drivers of child marriage in different contexts. In some contexts, there are marriage transactions and arrangements like bride price, arranged marriage, polygamy. In others, girls have a relatively higher degree of autonomy over engaging in sexual relations and premarital sex, and also in deciding who and when to marry or live with. In such contexts, there is often a greater acceptance of premarital sex and a normalization of transactional sex. And then other situations are affected by humanitarian crises, which also change the context and change the drivers of child marriage and require different interventions. So Sierra Leone is one of the poorest countries in the world, one of the remaining low-income countries. And the country has experienced frequent shocks, including a long civil war, then the Ebola epidemic, followed by COVID, and finally, most recently, the food and fuel crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine. While poverty has declined since the end of the Civil War, still 60% of the rural population is living in poverty. When we look at the child marriage trends and the trends in adolescent birth rates, we see that they have declined considerably since the end of the Civil War. So the child marriage rate for women aged 20 to 24, the under 18 years marriage rate, has declined from 50% in 2004 to 20% in 2019. So this is a significant decline. When we look at the relative degree of autonomy, the degree of control that adolescent girls have over marriage decisions and premarital sexual relations, we find that that level of autonomy is relatively high in Sierra Leone. Sexual relations and marriage situations or cohabitation are often self-initiated by adolescent girls with little influence from the family. There are no significant marriage transactions, and the likelihood of premarital sexual relations are high in Sierra Leone. So given that situation, the main focus of interventions in Sierra Leone have to focus on teenage pregnancy rather than child marriage, because teenage pregnancy precedes child marriage and often is a trigger of unions. In turn, teenage pregnancies are often caused by transactional sex to obtain goods and services. Now, moving from the problems to the drivers, This is a summary of what the research in Sierra Leone has synthesized. The first one is a gendered economy, where there are the expectations that adolescent girls provide for their own needs, that they earn their own money. But the adolescent girls have few opportunities to earn money, and men often demand sex for goods and services. There's also high rates of sexual violence, and but the justice system, both the formal and the informal system, don't respond very effectively, and there is a high degree of impunity to sexual violence. There are also limited GBV and child protection services, and practices like FGM, initiation, and the Bondo societies are also very strong and widespread in Sierra Leone. In terms of access to adolescent sexual and reproductive health services, unmarried adolescent girls face stigma and other discriminatory barriers to obtaining contraceptives. And so these barriers come from parents, from service providers, and from communities. In terms of education, there's still high rates of girls dropping out of secondary school. The phenomenon of school-related GBV is widespread. There's a lack of comprehensive sexuality education in schools and limited access to menstrual health management. Underlying these causes are, as I mentioned before, high levels of poverty, limited economic opportunities, the frequent crises, gender inequality and discriminatory gender norms, and unequal power dynamics. So, in order to address this situation, the strategies to prevent teenage pregnancies, including first and foremost, adolescent sexual and reproductive health information services, which includes contraceptives for unmarried adolescent girls, life skills education for adolescent girls, GBV and child protection services, and in terms of education, support for adolescent girls to complete school, to prevent school dropout, to make schools safe, address the issue of school-related gender-based violence, provide comprehensive sexuality education and menstrual health management support. Another dimension is social protection and economic opportunities for adolescent girls. And as far as social and behavior change interventions are concerned, promote supportive attitude towards and expectations of adolescent girls, which means working with families, with service providers, with teachers, with motorcycle riders who often demand in terms of in return for a ride, with chiefs, religious leaders, and others. There are also some opportunities for leveraging interventions for adolescent girls. There's a lot of work being done on adolescent sexual reproductive health services at the community level, at the service level, and at the policy levels. And we'll hear more about that later, I'm sure. In terms of education, there have been quite a number of initiatives to address school dropout and school-related gender-based violence, comprehensive sexuality education, and menstrual health management. And in terms of social protection, the Productive Social Safety Net and Youth Employment Project is about to be launched. So this is a national program that will be launched or is in the process of being launched. Now, while these interventions exist, they haven't yet reached a very high degree of coverage, and so that's one of the challenges, of course. I'll skip over this and move on to Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is also among the lowest income countries in the world, and 40% of the population lives below the national poverty line. The humanitarian situation since 2013 has been very severe, with armed conflict, massive displacement, and closure of many schools and health facilities. Currently, there are more than 3 million people who are facing acute food insecurity. And in the year 2022, there were 2 military coups, which gives an idea of the instability and the severity of the crisis in the country. When we look at child marriage trends, those trends have barely declined. They have been almost stagnant. They've gone down from 60% to 50% between 1985 and 2015. That's the last year that we have data for. In terms of the under 15-year-old marriage, that has stayed stagnant around 10%. When we look at the autonomy, girls' autonomy scale or spectrum, we see that Burkina Faso would be at the left end of the spectrum, with low degrees of girls' autonomy when it comes to premarital sexual relations and marriage decisions. Marriages are arranged and girls have little say in when and who to marry. Bride price is prevalent, and premarital sexual relations are not condoned, and they're avoided at all costs by parents. In terms of the drivers of child marriage, as I mentioned, adolescent girls lack the autonomy and agency to make decisions that affect their lives. Families fear girls' sexuality and premarital sex and pregnancy. There's a widespread lack of economic opportunities, high degrees of poverty. And then there are also other economic dimensions of child marriage, including bride price and polygamy. In terms of government and service provision, governance is relatively ineffective, and law enforcement is ineffective in relation to child marriage. There are challenges in terms of access to quality services, education, health, social protection, etc. The underlying factors include gender inequitable norms and practices, religious beliefs and power structures, and armed conflict and displacement. Now, the humanitarian situation is making the situation much worse. As a result of the humanitarian crisis, there has been an increase in poverty due to displacement and the loss of assets and opportunities for income generation. There's been an increase in sexual violence and in the fear of sexual violence, an increase in negative coping strategies such as child marriage, child labor, and also transactional sex. I mentioned the closure of schools and health facilities, the disruption in service provision, and the challenges related to quality and access to services. The displacement of people, often people are forced to leave their communities and move to urban centers, but this displacement also disrupts community-based interventions and can lead to backsliding on positive changes related to social norms and behaviors. So in that situation, there's a need to develop hybrid approaches to bridge the humanitarian development divide, which means a strong focus on the continued provision of health, education, and protection services to displaced populations, but also to populations who chose or who have been forced to remain in the conflict-affected areas, which is a particular challenge because often these areas are controlled by rebel groups or highly insecure and not safe for humanitarian actors, to provide cash transfers in emergencies and livelihood opportunities, ensure the continuity of community engagement approaches among displaced communities, and to continue the engagement with religious leaders. And to conclude, if we take another look at the girls' autonomy scale, as I presented, Sierra Leone would be on the right-hand side with relatively high degrees of autonomy for adolescent girls. And Burkina Faso represents a pretty clear example of a context where girls have much lower degrees of autonomy, especially in relation to premarital sexual relations and marriage decisions. But many countries in sub-Saharan Africa would fall somewhere in the middle. So this is just one way to look at how the different drivers play out in different countries. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joachim, for a great presentation that's elucidated a lot of important issues that we can get into through the presentations from the teams in Sierra Leone and Burkina, and also through conversation with the whole group. I'm going to pass the mic now to Mona Aika, who is a child protection specialist working on violence against children and harmful practices in the Nairobi Regional Office. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Gillian, and thank you so much, Joachim, for the presentation. Just to highlight, in East and Southern Africa, the drivers of child marriage are pretty similar. And we're seeing this region stands at 32% of girls are married before the age of 18. And if we put those into actual numbers, this region is home to over 50 million child brides. And we have the largest share in Ethiopia. So this initiative that we have partnered with West and Central Africa region, strategy notes are being developed also for Uganda, Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and Zambia. And what we're seeing so far, starting off with Malawi, poverty continues to be one of the main drivers that leads to child marriage. We also see gender inequality. In many parts of the regions, girls are not valued as much as boys, and they're expected to marry at a young age, and also before they complete their education. And this tends to be more prevalent in rural areas. We also see traditional practices and customs in some communities where they have really deeply entrenched cultural practices that encourage child marriage. What Joachim mentioned, we have communities that exchange dowry payments, which also motivate parents to marry off their daughters at a young age. Certain countries in East and Southern Africa are categorized as emergency with conflict and displacement. And we're also seeing, families marrying off their daughters as a coping mechanism to be able to survive. So it's a negative coping mechanism for families to marry off their daughters at an early stage. Education is also a big driver, where girls who are unable to access education, they're more likely to be married off at a young age. And this could be lack of schools in their communities, as well as, cultural beliefs that prioritize boys over the education of girls. We see countries such as Zambia, mainly the countries in the southern part of the region, where due to lack of, choices and opportunities in life, young people themselves, the children, are the ones who decide to marry each other. Peer-to-peer marriages exist in countries such as Zambia. We're also seeing this in certain parts of Zimbabwe and Malawi. And, these are all drivers that are, giving us an indication on the need to address these causes. Sexual violence and teenage pregnancy, something that also Joachim mentioned for West and Central Africa. This is also another driver. So we see that girls who experience sexual violence or become pregnant outside of a marriage, may be pressured to marry off in order to avoid the shame and stigma that is faced of getting pregnant before marriage. And pregnancy outside of marriage is also the main driver. We're seeing this in Malawi, the recent, strategy note that has been developed. Pregnancy outside marriage tends to be the main cause.
I think Mona is frozen for me. I don't know for anyone else.
And, it's an issue that requires a multifaceted approach, including the need to address poverty. Your internet connection is unstable. Can you still hear me, Gillian? So the need to address the poverty that is faced in most households in the region, promoting gender equality, protecting girls' rights, and of course, increasing good quality and accessible education for all children. Thank you, Gillian, and back to you.
Thank you, Mona, for that presentation. Very much appreciated. Today, we are obviously presenting the findings and the learning from the two strategy note development processes in Sierra Leone and Burkina, but we will definitely be focusing as well on other countries, including those in East and Southern Africa, more in the webinars to come. I want to now invite the two presenters from Burkina and Sierra Leone to come in. First is Josué Ango. Josué travaille comme spécialiste dans le domaine de la protection de l'enfant. Il est point focal pour le programme mariage d'enfants avec UNICEF. Bienvenue, Josué.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour.
Oh, ok, merci à vous. Allô? D'accord, je voudrais avant tout dire merci aux organisateurs et rendre un vibrant hommage à mon prédécesseur qui était point focal, Karim Sankara, qui effectue aujourd'hui son dernier jour de travail à UNICEF Burkina Faso parce qu'il a appelé à faire valoir ses talents ailleurs.
With me, those who know him know that he has really contributed to developing the work on those issues. He is not able to be here today because of previous engagements. I will provide a few details concerning the adaptation of the program for the protection of children. In Burkina Faso, we have 2 million displaced people internally, and 58% of them are children. 27% of them are female. Today, we can say that all the 13 regions in Burkina Faso have internally displaced people and are welcoming them. We also see that the implementation areas of our program are those in the center and north, center and east, center and west, have to deal also with the security aspects of this region. I also created a slide to show you which are the areas affected by the humanitarian crisis here and that are witnessing those phenomena. In our context, social, political, and institutional context, as per the social plan, we are seeing very populated areas reclaiming their power, their possibility to live and to have, for example, more favorable conditions of life. We can say that the security aspect now is a priority, and the government tries to make the territory as secure as possible. We would say that one woman out of 10 is married in Burkina Faso before the age of 10. The most affected areas are the Sahel, the east, the center and eastern part. As you see here in the map, the traditional causes in the context of the development is poverty. Poverty in first position and social norms that are not favorable, the very weak application of norms, of law, dropout at school, and the lack of protection for girls in terms of education on sexual relations and reproduction. With the crisis, we saw an exacerbation of those phenomena, especially the families became more and more poor, and so they had to turn to child marriage to be able to survive. Actually, with the humanitarian crisis, we have also saw a closure of many schools. In 31 March 2021, we had 3,000 school establishments that were closed. Those closures, well, actually excluded 1 million of children. So this challenge became more and more exacerbated during this humanitarian crisis. Also, the health center and health assistance centers were closed. There were a lot of services linked to sexual education and reproductive education, which were quite useful to prevent child marriage. Populations in some areas are left into ignorance and they know nothing about some other practices.
Il y a des pratiques religieuses, qu'on dirait culturelles, qui se sont
We
renforcées.
also saw the reinforcement and the empowerment of cultural and religious practices where they put at risk the rights of children and women. We also noted a very high number of deaths linked to the security crisis. So widows started fostering this tendency and child marriage because they were first to do so. The families who didn't want to see that widows were present within the family and were not able to look after the family decided to give their little girls as spouses. As we have said, we changed also the priority here because interventions focus now on physical attacks and social cohesion instead of a fight against child marriage. In Burkina Faso, we have adopted several strategies to adapt our program in light of such phenomenon, which was exacerbated by the humanitarian crisis, with a community approach with the identification of reference focal points within the community that were able to assure access to services with the sensibilization awareness initiatives. We also received a lot of support in prevention messages and prevention campaigns against child marriage. For example, also with the collection of very important data on gender-based violence. We also considered the internally displaced people within this program so that the community could integrate also the data coming from them. We worked to reduce the rate of child marriage, and we have identified an approach towards communication, because with the crisis we were not able to have a mass communication campaign. Some approaches of the communication were adopted to some limited groups. There is a support number.
La ligne d'assistance au cas de VBG, et notamment le 80 0012 87, qui ont été vraiment renforcés pour résoudre ce problème de signalement. Et il y a également l'utilisation de nouvelles technologies pour informer et recevoir et collecter aussi.
Also using new technology to collect information and data linked to child marriage, and also using these tools at local level in order to develop initiatives that are supported by UNICEF. We also are able to build capacities so that we can strengthen these relationships in order to prevent child marriage, and also be active at local level in communities to protect children. We need to strengthen these actions so that we can really play a major role in prevention action and strengthening this role. All these strategies, of course, consider the implementation of the program for the next steps to come, and of course to take on challenges that we already face in order to ensure nexus, considering of course development and emergency. These challenges have to facilitate the monitoring at local level in order to reduce distances and collect stronger data. We also need to strengthen capacity and partnerships at local level so that we can continue with local activities and so that local actors may be real presence. Also training trainers on child marriages, trying to fight child marriages, and try to integrate in the operational humanitarian action some concrete action to respond to child marriage challenge, and also being able to strengthen the importance of humanitarian workers, because they are the major actors and we have to focus on them for humanitarian action. So the biggest challenge is trying to link all these strategy and also to be active at the government level so that we can be able to strengthen our fight against child marriage. Thanks for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Josué, pour ta présentation. Thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to invite now Christian Sveinsdotter from UNFPA Sierra Leone, who is the program analyst on adolescence and youth and sexual reproductive health and rights, to speak about the work that they're doing in Sierra Leone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. I lost your sound for a bit, so I'm not sure if you can all hear me and if it was only my phone or my laptop.
I can hear you.
Are you able to hear me? I'm not able to hear anyone right now.
We do hear you. Christine, we do hear you.
Yes, we hear you.
Oui, on t'entend.
Okay, you can hear me. Unfortunately, I cannot hear you. I was hearing everything just a moment ago, and then it stopped. Okay, but I will just go ahead and do the presentation, and hopefully it will be fixed later. So my name is Christine from UNFPA Sierra Leone office. And I'm going to present to you on the Sierra Leone multi-sectoral approach to reducing child marriage and its main driver, adolescent pregnancy. So most of the work that we at UNFPA do to reduce child marriage is under the Global Program to End Child Marriage, where we are working jointly with UNICEF, using a multi-level and multi-sectoral approach. So we are looking at the individual level, of course, looking at the adolescent girl, empowering and protecting her through life skills, education supports, counseling, and appropriate services. The interpersonal level, where UNICEF is leading on the positive parenting, and we also, for instance, conduct intergenerational dialogues where the adolescent girls are able to discuss their issues with the duty bearers. The institutional, where we look at gender-friendly, adolescent-friendly school systems, SRH, protection, and gender-based violence response services. The community level, where we have engagement with community leaders and also with a strong focus on male engagement. And then the policy level, where we influence laws and policies to ensure they're adolescent and girl-friendly, and where we have the national framework for the reduction of child marriage and adolescent pregnancy, which is going to be the main focus of my presentation. So the national framework is called the National Strategy for the Reduction of Adolescent Pregnancy and Child Marriage. It includes a national goal to reduce adolescent pregnancy and child marriage and the objectives to achieve this goal, priority strategies, guiding principles, coordination mechanisms, an M&E framework, and a costing framework for 2018 to 2022. So the previous strategy was from 2018 to 2022 and has now expired. And we are currently supporting, along with UNICEF, the review of the strategy to assess what has worked well and what can be improved to inform a new strategy for 2023 onwards. So this is a truly multi-sectoral approach. It's a joint strategy between the Ministry of Health and Sanitation that houses the National Secretariat on the Reduction of Teenage Pregnancy and Child Marriage, the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, the Ministry of Social Welfare, the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, Ministry of Youth Affairs, and then the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development. Now, it has 6 key areas of interventions or pillars that you see here. And I'm just going to go as briefly as I can through the different pillars and how UNFPA is supporting some of the interventions under the pillars. So we have pillar 1, policy and legal environment, with the objective to improve the policy and legal environment for the protection of adolescents and to improve the capacity of implementing agencies to implement laws, policies, and protocols. So for instance, here we supported the national policy on radical inclusions in school, which I'm going to go into more later. CSE has been integrated into the educational framework, national strategy for the male involvement, Gender Empowerment Act, out of school children's strategy, comprehensive school safety policy, and then revised Child Rights Act. So these are some of the key policies. So So under Pillar 2, we have the adolescent and youth friendly services. And this is where, this is where UNFPA has supported the government in establishing adolescent-friendly SRH hubs run by the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs in cooperation with the National Secretariat for the Reduction of Teenage Pregnancy and supported, yes, by UNFPA. Health workers are provided by the Ministry of Health and Sanitation. And then it's piloted in 4 communities in Kwanatugu. This is one of the districts with the highest rates of child marriage and teenage pregnancy in particular. And the hubs are located in really hard to reach areas in this district for easier access to SRH counseling and services for adolescent girls. We also support the GBV response, one-stop centers established by the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, supported by us and UN Women, that have social workers from Ministry of Social Welfare that are also supported by UNICEF, and then are also linked to the police by the family support units. Those one-stop centers are currently in 10 districts, but are complemented by civil society efforts. So we have those so-called rainbow centers run by an NGO in the districts where one-stop centers are not currently. And this is a government effort to provide a survivor-centered approach and comprehensive service package for survivors of gender-based violence. Through interventions in safe spaces, we also refer girls at risk of child marriage and teenage pregnancies to the SRH hubs and the GBV one-stop centers as appropriate. We are also partnering with UNICEF on introducing the gender-based violence information management system nationally in Sierra Leone, and we also support a 116 hotline for gender-based violence survivors to be referred for services. Now, moving to Pillar 3, we have the enabling school environment. So this mainly focuses on comprehensive sexuality education and an enabling learning environment for adolescent girls and boys. So here, one of the key achievements is actually radical inclusion. So in 2019, the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education formed an SRH task force comprising of the 6 line ministries and relevant partners. They work together to formulate research on the barriers to girls accessing education. Now, the findings of this research led to the Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education lifting a ban on pregnant girls attending school, and also announcing the formulation of what is now the National Policy on Radical Inclusion in Schools, launched in 2021. We have also supported the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education with comprehensive sexuality education. As was mentioned by Joachim when he gave the background to Sierra Leone, CSE is lacking, but this is something that we have been working on with the government and have made quite a lot of progress in the past years. So some of the key achievements are that the Sexuality Education Review Assessment Tool was carried out in 2019. Now CSE is integrated into the basic education curriculum framework across 7 syllabi. Learning and teaching materials have been developed and have been reviewed and validated by key stakeholders. We have trained trainers and are planning a pilot in schools for 2023. And then alongside this whole process, there's been a strong emphasis on community engagement and tailored stakeholder workshops on CSE, including involving religious leaders, parliamentarians, paramount chiefs, civil society, and so on. So also under Pillar 3, we have the reintegration of girls into schools. So to support the radical inclusion, UNFPA supported the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education last year to reintegrate 800 vulnerable girls into formal education in the 4 districts with the highest rates of adolescent pregnancy and child marriage. So this was very much community-led. Girls were provided with back-to-school kits, including uniforms, scholastic materials, and adolescent info pack that was produced by the National Secretariat. They were also provided with pre-reintegration family planning counseling to mitigate against the risk of dropping out due to pregnancy. And then girls also were provided with pre-integration life skills. It was quite successful, as 200 girls were integrated in March and another 600 in September. And at the end of year 2022, when we followed up with them, all 800 girls were still in school. And we plan to scale this up this year. So I'll just skip through this for the sake of time. So pillar 4, we have communication and advocacy. So here we have supported some key activities such as the communication strategy for adolescent and youth-friendly services. We have supported the conduction of radio and TV discussions across different partners, both NGO and government partners, on child marriage, teenage pregnancy, radical inclusion in school, CSE. We, along with UNICEF, helped develop the National Life Skills Manual, used to deliver life skills, and is supposed to be used across the country. And then the adolescent info packs that have some SRAs and menstrual health management information for adolescents. And then some edutainment materials for the reduction of child marriage, teenage pregnancy, and GBV. We put up billboards with family planning and GBV messaging. The billboards are owned by the secretariats. Based on the National Skills Manual, we supported the development of radio program during COVID to reach girls with SRH information and life skills information. These were then developed into podcasts and are now in use in safe spaces to advance life skills sessions and disability inclusion. They, for instance, include adolescents speaking about issues that concern them, experts from different line ministries speaking, so entertainment materials such as dramatization of life scenarios, songs, and games. So they have been found to increase attendance in safe spaces in life skill sessions and increase understanding of content. Now moving on to pillar 5, we have community ownership. This is an important one, to engage with communities and empower them so they can take individual and collective responsibility for the reduction of adolescent pregnancy and child marriage. So here we have the male engagement component, where we work with MAPES through our male engagement implementing partner. They are male advocacy peer educators that are role model men in the communities that conduct community engagements, that follow up on cases of child marriage, of GBV, that raise awareness and promote positive masculinity. And then UNICEF also has safe spaces for boys under this program, under this pillar. We have, of course, the positive parenting by UNICEF. And then UNICEF and UNFPA both engage with community leaders and other community stakeholders, mainly traditional and religious leaders, through, for instance, the intergenerational dialogues, as well as targeting, for instance, KK and Okada riders that are motorcycle riders that are often perpetrators of transactional sex or GBV against adolescent girls, targeting different community members, and also working with community leaders to develop community action plans where they themselves take ownership of specific steps to actually reduce or end child marriage in their communities. Under this pillar, we also have the life skills education, which is the out of school CSE. So we deliver life skills through safe spaces and have reached over 20,000 adolescent girls and over 6,000 boys, along with UNICEF, across 4 districts with the highest rates of child marriage and teenage pregnancy. These safe spaces provide a safe environment for the girls to play, to interact with peers, to discuss issues that concern them, and to get advice and counseling by the mentors. And the mentors often serve as mediators between the girls and their families and the communities when it comes to various issues that they face with their families, and sometimes played a role in averting child marriage plans. In the safe spaces, the girls are also supported to enroll and remain in school. They're encouraged to continue school, and they're giving educational packages, including scholastic materials, and also menstrual hygiene packages. And finally, we have pillar 6, coordination. So this is the pillar that makes sure that the strategies, activities are well coordinated and evaluated. So here we have supported the National Secretariat for the Reduction of Teenage Pregnancy, that are the coordinating body for the strategy. To, for instance, hold multi-sectoral technical committee meetings across sectors and with the line ministries. They also have the regional meetings, regional steering committee meetings on a district level. We also support GBV steering committee meetings that work to support the one-stop centers and coordinate GBV response on a district level. And then UNFPA has also been supporting the Salone Adolescent Girl Network, which is a network of organizations and agencies working with and for adolescent girls to coordinate activities and to, for instance, one of the main aims is to reduce child marriage and teenage pregnancies. So this mainly consists of smaller civil society organizations. So those are the 6 pillars and some of the key interventions that UNFPA has been working on to reduce teenage pregnancy and child marriage, teenage pregnancy as the main driver of child marriage. Some of the challenges that we have seen are, for instance, there's a very strong political will to reduce child marriage and teenage pregnancy and sexual violence and other gender-based violence among all stakeholders, but there is a lack of resources, as this is a low resource setting, to fully implement and those strategies, and implementation is mainly donor funded. There is low political and societal will to eliminate FGM. FGM is quite a strong tradition and is found to be one of the drivers of child marriage. There's also some community pushback against SRH interventions for adolescents, and particularly on family planning and CSE. And then despite all efforts, coordination remains challenging always. So some of the lessons learned, such multi-sectoral plans should have concrete action plans, including budgetary allocations. Roles and responsibilities of line ministries and other stakeholders should be clearly spelled out on national and subnational level. Various actors working on interventions to reduce child marriage and teenage pregnancy are difficult to coordinate across the country. However, the strategy provides a good basis for coordination and standardization. This, for instance, includes safe space and life skills intervention that needs to be further standardized to avoid duplication and to manage community expectations. And to further expand their coverage. And then strong community and multi-sectoral engagement can mitigate backlash against CSE and SRH interventions for adolescents. And we have really found this, especially in the target communities where we work, that there is a high acceptance of such interventions, sometimes higher than in other communities. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much. And I'll be ready to answer questions later. Hopefully my speaker will, the sound will work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for a great presentation. It's really interesting to hear about the work that is being done by UNFPA and partners in Sierra Leone, and of course also to learn more from you, Josue, about what's happening in Burkina. There are several similarities across these two contexts, particularly in terms of the main drivers around poverty and lack of access to services, And then, of course, there are unique drivers in different settings. For example, the role of pregnancy and transactional sex is playing a far bigger role in the Sierra Leonean setting than it is in the Burkinabe setting, which is very much at the moment focused around supporting the needs of displaced people and people who have remained in communities where there has been conflict and crisis. I don't want to use this time to chat myself. There are so many questions coming from participants, and we would like to dive right into that. I'm just having a look to see what the first question is here to put to the two speakers and Joachim. And it is there. Let's see. What type of social protection program is working for adolescent girls in development and humanitarian contexts? That's the first question. And I will leave it to the three presenters to decide who will respond or to just jump in as they see fit. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can, Gillian.
Okay, great. So the first question that has been put forward for the presenters is, what type of social protection program is working for adolescent girls in development and humanitarian contexts? Would one of the presenters like to respond to this?
Leon, this is Kristen. I can hear.
Okay,
I can finally hear, so that's good. But I just wanted to say, I think I will let UNICEF rather respond.
Sure, that's fine. Joachim, is this something you would like to jump in on?
This is a big question. I think I'd rather, because I'm not a specialist in social protection, I'd rather refer to you to a very good publication on called "How Cash Transfers Can Contribute to Ending Child Marriage" by Nicholas Mathers, and I put it in the chat. You know, I think it's a very important question, but I think it also speaks to the need to work much more with social protection specialists and attract them to this kind of webinars. But I'm sure we'll have further webinars that look specifically at this particular issue. When I worked on the Sierra Leone report, I looked specifically at evidence related to social protection to prevent transactional sex, you know, and also social protection directly to adolescent girls. So this publication by Nick Mathers has some evidence on that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's great. That's a very good place to start. It's an excellent article. Maybe we'll move on to the next question, which is, did you find strong evidence of conflict and displacement and food insecurity as drivers of child marriage? This is a question for Josue, I think.
Oui, alors merci. Par rapport à cette, je reviendrai d'abord par rapport à la précédente question. Pour dire, dans la présentation de Joachim, il avait parlé de cash transfert pour le programme de protection sociale pour lutter contre le mariage d'enfants. Il faut aussi rendre disponibles certains services sociaux de base. Nous avons parlé de l'accès à l'éducation, l'accès à la santé, et aussi pouvoir rendre la fille vraiment autonome voilà, pour vraiment réduire sa vulnérabilité sur le plan économique et aussi sur les divers plans qui contribueraient à accroître sa vulnérabilité vis-à-vis du mariage des enfants. Maintenant, parlant d'évidence, nous n'avons pas d'études à proprement dit sur ça, mais nous avons des analyses de certaines données et aussi issues des visites terrain et des évaluations, vraiment qui montrent que au sein des populations déplacées et avec l'exacerbation des privations, c'est-à-dire il y a la promiscuité, il y a le pouvoir d'achat qui baisse, il y a plein de choses qui n'avaient pas, qui se sont encore accrues. Cela favorise vraiment la tendance à des familles à pouvoir à donner leur fille en mariage pour diminuer les charges et pour diminuer les charges vraiment qu'ils ont à leur sein. Et cela permettrait aussi, je prends un exemple vraiment très banal que j'ai eu lors d'une supervision où une des familles de déplacés internes donnerait leur fille à des communautés, à des membres de la communauté haute en guise de remerciement pour le bienfait dont ils ont bénéficié. Et ces bienfaits n'étaient autre chose que la nourriture qu'on donnait aux déplacés internes et parfois le toit qu'on trouvait pour qu'ils puissent se loger. Et en guise de remerciement, rien que pour ça, ils étaient prêts à donner leur enfant en mariage. Donc, ce n'est pas des études réalisées avec des faits tellement choses, mais c'est suite au constat sur le terrain et par rapport à des évaluations spontanées que les acteurs humanitaires et que les acteurs aussi de la protection de l'enfant ont eu à faire sur le terrain au Burkina Faso. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. That's great.
Il y a ma collègue Edith Ouedraogo qui veut compléter, si vous permettez. Elle est du Burkina Faso.
Oui, certainement.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Ungo pour la présentation qui a fait le point de ce travail conjoint que nous avons eu ensemble avec le gouvernement pour rendre compte non seulement des acquis, mais aussi surtout les défis. Donc, UNFPA, UNICEF, nous avons vraiment travaillé de concert pour faire les analyses sous le prisme, bien sûr, des orientations qui ont été données. Pour revenir à cette question de mariage d'enfants, surtout en situation de crise, il faut dire que la situation de crise humanitaire que connaît le pays depuis de longues années a créé un environnement malheureusement favorable à l'exacerbation de cette pratique de mariage d'enfants. Toutes ces familles qui ont dû se déplacer dans l'urgence pour fuir la situation de crise, pour fuir les attaques, arrivent dans des zones sécurisées, mais qui malheureusement ne peuvent pas créer les conditions nécessaires pour une résilience rapide. Donc, ce sont des familles qui vivent dans la pauvreté. Et ce que l'on constate sur le terrain lors de nos suivis, c'est que les familles sont promptes à donner ces filles en mariage pour se décharger justement parce qu'elles n'ont plus le minimum vital pour assurer la survie de la famille. Donc, c'est des situations qui aggravent la pratique du mariage d'enfants. Donc, comme on le sait d'ailleurs, en situation normale, nous savons que la pauvreté est une cause structurelle de la pratique du mariage d'enfants. Et malheureusement, dans la crise, c'est une pratique qui est exacerbée. Donc, en termes d'évidence, nous avons en place des mécanismes de suivi à travers le rapportage, à travers des entretiens avec les familles qui montrent qu'effectivement, c'est une réalité et que nous devons agir rapidement. C'est pour cette raison que l'UNFPA, dans ses interventions, met le focus sur la question d'autonomisation pour assurer un minimum de résilience et permettre justement aux familles de ne pas se sentir obligées de donner ces petites filles en mariage parce qu'elles sont dans des situations difficile. Donc, voilà un peu ce que je voulais ajouter à ce que le collègue vient de dire tantôt, pour dire que les évidences, on les a à travers plusieurs canaux de communication. Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour cette intervention. Je vois une autre main. Je ne sais pas si c'est sur le même sujet ou c'est une autre question. Kiora, Bernard?
Yes, thank you very much. Can I go ahead? I have a contribution to make.
Certainly. Oh, great.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the question that was earlier raised about social cash transfer and tackling child marriage. Just share an experience on an initiative we have started in Zambia this year, whereby we are working in partnership with the social policy and nutrition section to address the vulnerable families that are targeted under the nutrition social cash transfer program, whereby social welfare is targeting at community care, community case management. So this is a situation where working with the nutrition, the families that are identified as having children that are recurrently malnourished, case management kicks in to understand the underlying factors. And basically here we are targeting adolescent girls that are mothers or expecting, and young mothers that have under 2-year-olds. So in this case, how we are addressing child marriage is by addressing, by working with young mothers and other girls within the family, other young people in the family. We're also talking about sexual reproductive health. We are also mentoring and, through intensive family and family dialogue interventions in order for these families and young people to make decisions about not getting married, about access to family planning and reproductive health services. And at the same time, the cash assistance that is being given is now being used to address the vulnerabilities that the family faces. So this three-pronged approach is helping in ensuring that the young girls in those families are not getting into child marriage at a young age. They're not getting pregnant. And those that already have children, their young ones are taken care of. They have access to information, and they also have access to information that can help them make decisions on whether to want to go for skills training, want to continue with their education, what are the care alternatives that are available to them, and things like that. So that's how we are using the cash, social cash transfer window to address child marriage in Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. That's really helpful and informative. And as Joachim said, we could have a session on social protection, cash transfers, and marriage all on its own. And it's great to just get some insight into the work that you're doing in Zambia. I want to move along to the next question, which is in relation to FGM and child marriage. One of the participants has asked, were you able to establish a relationship between the practices of FGM and child marriage in these two countries? I will leave it to the two presenters to respond to that.
So maybe I can come in. Yes, FGM is quite prevalent in Sierra Leone, and it has been found to be, a driver, at least for child marriage in a way, because when a girl has been cut, she's often seen as being ready for marriage. We do, it's just a little bit of a tricky context in Sierra Leone because it's very strongly embedded into the culture. So we are also still kind of finding ways to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Would you like to jump in, Josue?
Yeah.
Quelqu'un d'autre?
Gillian, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Gillian. So this is Neha. Yeah, this is Neha from Sierra Leone.
Hi.
Sorry, I did not see I did not raise the hand, but I just came in. I hope it's fine.
That's fine, of course.
Yeah, thank you for that. So regarding the question on FGM and child marriage correlation. So this is what we have been discussing here in the team with UNFPA and UNICEF. But this is where we also want to know, because we lack evidence and data on the correlation to to strategize our programming, especially on child marriage. We also feel that if we have good evidence and data, so this FGM relation with child marriage can also prove as an entry point for us to discuss more on FGM, because as all of you are aware, FGM is a contentious issue in Sierra Leone. Government doesn't want to talk much about it. So I also would like to know if there are countries here present today, and do we have data and evidence, or if someone want to share, if someone can share with us on how they were able to establish that correlation, some best practices which worked for them in convincing the government or doing an advocacy with the government, that it is one of the major driving factor for child marriage. Thank you.
Thank you, Neha, for that question. It's very welcome. I wonder if in the immediate term, people could put some responses to that in the chat box to make some connections, and we can speak if there's a moment towards the end. But I want to make sure that I make my way through a couple of the other questions here, especially those that repeated several times. There was one, for example, in relation to male, well, two aspects. One is the extent to which boy marriage is an issue in these two countries, and then a kind of parallel issue in relation to male engagement. And I just wanted to ask the speakers from Sierra Leone and Burkina to respond to that. And then we will have to start wrapping things up, I think. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Gillian, can you repeat the question on the male engagement?
Yes, definitely. There were two questions related to men and boys. The first was, to what extent is boy marriage an issue in the context where you're working? And the second one was, what kind of work are you doing in relation to male engagement, if any?
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll come in and then other colleagues can input. But on boys involved in child marriage, yes, there are, of course, cases. It's much less prevalent. For instance, I think the DHS from 2019 shows that 51% of women were married before age 20. We're talking about age 20 here, in comparison to 16% of men. So it is not nearly as common. And then usually they are more likely to be married to peers, while the girls are more likely to be married to older men. I'll let others come in.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to jump in from Sierra Leone on that? Just looking for hands popped up, but I don't see any. So Joshua, do you want to have a look at that?
Oui, allô? Voilà. Au Burkina Faso également, ces données sont relativement faibles, mais il existe des mariages d'enfants pour ce qui concerne les jeunes garçons. Lorsqu'on parlait des choses, des facteurs culturels, c'est des facteurs, il y a des sociétés où cela est permis et même instauré, et ça ne pose pas de problème. Donc, mais par rapport aux différentes raisons ou aux causes données au niveau du mariage des filles, c'est vraiment très restreint et c'est vraiment culturel. Et on n'a pas parlé de Lévira, de Sorora, c'est également aussi à travers ces éléments, notamment si la femme a son mari qui est décédé au cours des attaques ou de maladies, et automatiquement, on ne veut pas laisser la femme veuve comme ça, on le donne au frère de son mari. Et s'il se trouve que ce frère est en bas âge, il a le devoir de prendre la femme et avec le soutien de la communauté, et il va gérer. Donc, ça existe au Burkina Faso, même si les données sont relativement très faibles. Merci. Il y a ma collègue Edith qui veut compléter aussi.
Oui, merci bien. Effectivement, au Burkina, nous avons ces cas également. Autant on donne les filles, les adolescentes en mariage, autant on donne aussi les adolescents en mariage, même si les nombres sont beaucoup plus inférieurs que les adolescentes. Et on a fait ce constat dans les villages, dans les communautés qui sont ciblées par nos interventions, INFPA, UNICEF, bien entendu. Et nous avons jugé urgent d'intégrer cette cible dans nos interventions sous l'angle de la prévention. Et du coup, nous avons développé des sessions de communication sociale pour justement empêcher que ces adolescents soient également donnés en mariage. C'est un constat qui a été fait. Et en 2022, nous avons pu recenser un nombre assez important de jeunes garçons qui ont été sauvés de cette pratique parce que nous avons pris en compte cette dimension, cette problématique du mariage des adolescents dans nos interventions. Donc, comme disait mon collègue, c'est des faits réels qui existent chez nous et il faut dorénavant intégrer. Heureusement, dans les stratégies et notamment dans la théorie du changement, nous avons inclus justement cette frange de la population que sont les adolescents, tant du point de vue de l'approche transformatrice de genre qui prend en compte cette cible, mais aussi pour prévenir que ces adolescents ne soient donnés en mariage pour des raisons que nous sommes en train de rechercher fondamentalement. Bien sûr que c'est la culture, c'est des normes de genre, etc. Ce sont ces pratiques, comme il disait tantôt, de Lévira, de Sorora, qui sont des pratiques qui existent, mais qui malheureusement créent des situations d'atteinte aux droits de ces adolescents. Donc, c'est juste pour dire que ça existe et nous allons mettre en place un dispositif suffisamment efficace et valide pour recenser ces cas et travailler surtout sur l'aspect anthropologique, approfondir un peu les causes structurelles de cette pratique qui touche aussi les garçons. Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour cette intervention. Thank you very much for the feedback on these questions. There's so much to discuss and great ideas and experience within this group. I'm afraid I'm going to need to start wrapping this up. I want to pass the microphone or the screen to Mona Aika, but in the interim, I just want to say thank you very much to everyone, particularly to Joachim and Josue and Christian for their presentations. They've been very thorough and really interesting. Merci à tous. And I will pass now to, and of course to the interpreters, and I will pass to Mona.
Thank you all very much. Again, also I want to echo and thank Child Frontiers for your support in organizing this learning session. Many thanks to colleagues from Burkina Faso and Sierra Leone for the insightful presentations. And really a key note to take away there is that it's important for us to understand the drivers of child marriage, as this is critical in how we're going to design the effective prevention and response strategies on ending child marriage. I would like to take a short pause and ask Emily to launch a poll, thanking all of you for introducing yourself online, but we would like to keep a record of where everybody's connecting from. So kindly take some time to respond to these questions that are on our screen at the moment, so that we know who you are, whether you're coming in from an NGO, one of the government representatives from the region, or UNICEF and UNFPA offices, or if you're a consultant. So do let us know and which part of the region or of the continent you're connecting with us from, whether it's East and Southern Africa or West and Central Africa or elsewhere in the world. So we'd like to know where you're connecting from. So maybe I'll take a seconds there. And maybe because we are a bit behind time, it's now 30 past the hour, we will be sending, okay, I see the learning themes have been projected. We would like to hear from you, and also we're going to send out these the different learning themes that are proposed for this community of practice, and we'd like to hear from you on which ones you'd like us to prioritize. So that will be sent out by email. So we're not going to go through the whole list, but the list is projected for you to be there and be informed, and also we'd like to hear from you. So we'll be sending out an email, and also we'll send it out through the newsletter that is there. So as we conclude, the next webinar is planned for the 17th of May, and it will be on the linkages between sexuality, marriage, and pregnancy. The date and timing for the webinar will be confirmed via our monthly newsletter, and of course reminders will be sent out nearer the time. Just to remind all of you, if you haven't yet joined the mailing list, complete a short form asking Bertha to post the link in the chat box so that you can be automatically receiving updates of this community of practice on ending child marriage. So take time to fill in that short form through the link provided in the chat box so that you can receive information directly, including updates of upcoming webinars. So with that, I thank you all very much, and I would like to wish you all a very good rest of the day. Goodbye for now.